the Ingram M10 Submachine Gun. A pretty familiar piece of hardware for anybody out there that really likes action movies from the 80s and 90s, video games, and if you happen to be a Floridian drug smuggler from the 1980s. The M10 or MAC-10 submachine gun really is one of my personal favorites for a myriad of reasons, but because I have a captive audience and I have the limitless capacity to complain about things, I'm going to talk to you today about the pros and cons of the MAC-10, what makes it a really cool modern submachine gun, and what made it less desirable in the past. Let's go ahead and talk about the history of the MAC-10, because I think it's important to understand the context of its origins before we go into anything further.
The M10 story begins in the United States post-World War II, where an Army veteran named Gordon Ingram had been pitching various submachine gun designs to the US military with hopes of widespread adoption. After a few designs had come and gone with varying success, the M10 had come into existence. It showed some promise in certain scenarios, but Ingram needed a little help to cater his design where it was needed. It seemed to be better suited as a close-quarters SMG for low-profile operations. You know, the M10 is a chunky submachine gun by today's standards, but back then it was considered concealable. By the way, if anybody makes a concealed carry holster for the M10, let me know. In the late 1960s, Ingram collaborated with Mitch Werble III, a former OSS operative that later specialized in designing military silencers and had a knack for covert operations equipment. Werble pitched the M10 submachine gun fitted with a silencer of his design to the US Special Forces stationed in Vietnam. It was deemed favorable and was sold in limited quantities. However, after this, the ambitions seemed to grow from there, a little too much, as Ingram and Werble gained investments into their new company, Military Armaments Corporation, or MAC, by convincing investors that the M10 would eventually replace the 1911 service pistol as the standard issue sidearm for the US military. Which is a crazy idea considering how massive the M10 is in comparison to any handguns issued at the time. Werble and Ingram would eventually be ousted from the company as a result of this, and Military Armaments Corporation would continue production for a few years before eventually dissolving in 1973. However, the story doesn't really end there, because after the company's assets and hardware were sold to various other companies, we now have MAC clones dating from the end of Military Armaments Corporation all the way up to present day.
Okay, so now that we took a quick look at the history of the MAC-10's development, we can kind of talk about the MAC-10 in a more modern context. Why wasn't it a very desirable submachine gun for recreational shooters and collectors up until the 2010s, possibly? It had a pretty rough history behind it, but it was mostly due to the handling characteristics, which we can go ahead and talk about now. And trust me, even though the handling characteristics and a few things I'm going to talk about may sound really bad, it actually gets a lot better for the old MAC-10 here. So even though the M10 was designed to be some sort of compact submachine gun for special operations use, it is still very heavy for its size. So let's go ahead and talk about some other things that weigh similar to the MAC-10 at 8 pounds for a handheld weapon.
A 12-inch cast iron skillet, a fully loaded AKM assault rifle, a gallon of my own piss, don't judge me, my cat Susie, 2 M1 carbines, or 4 1911 service pistols.
The ergonomics aren't super great. There's really not a whole lot to hold on to on this thing. It lacks a foregrip, it lacks really anything forward of the trigger to grasp onto, which can be a problem if you're not a very experienced user of fully automatic weapons, because there's a likelihood you can actually shoot your fingers off with this. It has a very high rate of fire, and with no purchase on the front, it can be kind of hard to hold down sometimes. So I attached the original wire folding stock that came with the gun, just so you can kind of see the simple nature of it. It's just 2 metal bars with a folding stock attached to it, and it comes off pretty easy too. Really, the construction of it reminds me a lot of a coat hanger I used to use to break into my old 99 Jimmy when I locked the keys inside of my car once a week. I'm going to roll some footage right now of what the original sights look like on a MAC-10, because honestly, they're very simple and crude. It almost looks like a bent paper clip and somebody just took a hole puncher to the back of the receiver. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know what this sighting arrangement is on my MAC-10. It's a perfect combination of 90s and early 2000s tactical, where it's got a Weaver style rail and H&K G3 sights slapped on there. And the 400-yard aperture had been graciously opened up into a massive ghost ring. And it's also crooked. The front sight is actually leaning slightly clockwise. So I'm not going to trust the sighting arrangement, but let's be real. not many people who use these submachine guns cater them towards accurate and precision shooting. And another fact of the matter is, if you're going to spend this much money on a gun and get annoyed about the accuracy aspects of it, just remember, you could have bought a Barrett M107 for the same amount of money as one of these. But yet again, I think even the Barrett isn't even that accurate. I think it's like 4 MOA. So you figure it out, because one of these right now at the time of this video costs about $6,000. So you're probably thinking at this point, I've done nothing but complain about the platform and how it's essentially a useless bullet hose. So you might be asking, why did I go out of the way to purchase one of these for myself? Well, really, it's because when you purchase a submachine gun like a MAC-10, this is what you're paying for. This is the lower receiver, the registered component here in the United States. This is the machine gun, which allows me to get upper receivers from companies like Lage Manufacturing that turn this into a much more practical platform and slows the rate of fire down to about 600 rounds per minute and lets it shoot 9mm. So if you're going to invest the same amount of money that would be equivalent to a used car on a submachine gun like this, you might as well go ahead and put forth the extra capital on an upper receiver set that would make it a much more practical and pleasant shooting experience. So from Lage Manufacturing, I went ahead and upgraded the grip to be more comfortable. It's a lot wider with a funneled magwell if you're using the original upper receiver. I have a 2-position collapsing PDW stock and the MAC-10 31 upper receiver. This is not a whole lot of money to set you back in comparison to the MAC-10 itself, and it allows you to have a much more pleasant experience. So with that being said, we kind of went over how the MAC-10 went from being an ambitious military project with limited success to a kind of overlooked and undesired recreational submachine gun from the 1970s and forward. And it wouldn't be until the 2010s when this would become a much more desirable platform because of the modularity the aftermarket offers it. So as a collector, if you want to break into the world of fully automatic firearms in the United States, this is pretty much the best way to start. You get the modularity of the aftermarket, you get the additional support from companies that are still operating to this day, and I really like mine. So if you stuck it out till the end here, I really appreciate you watching my first video. I have a lot more ideas coming down the pipeline, so stay tuned for those. Once again, I really appreciate it.